we're going to look at sexual reproduction in fungi, and even things like fungi do have sexual reproduction. When we look at it, sometimes in what happens with them occurs in a different format than we might expect. Let's start out with the terminology that we have to understand. Sexual means there is an exchange of gametes. When we talk about plants, we talked about pollen getting over to the egg cell. With fungi, it doesn't work quite the same way. Normally, when we're looking at gametes, they're either going to be hyphal strands or they're going to be something along those lines that's going to cause the exchange of gametes. We have asexual. Asexual means that we get reproduction without the exchange of gametes. When we get such reproduction, it is not genetically diverse because it is exactly the same as what you started out with. We also have a term that we call the dikaryon or dikaryotic, which means that there are two distinct haploid nuclei in each cell, or two kinds of haploid nuclei in each cell, one coming from each parent. And these don't fuse together to give us a diploid phase until a specific time occurs, and when they do fuse together, they don't fuse together very long. We're going to talk about an ascus. And an ascus is a cell that will produce sexual spores internally. When we look at the production of sexual spores internally like that, we use terms like ascospores and ascocarp. Spores being the type of spores, carp being the type of body. We have a basidium, and a basidium will produce sexual spores externally. So when we're looking at a basidium, we're talking about something where the spores are going to be produced externally on it. And again, we have terms. We talk about basidiospores, which are the spores of a basidium. We have the basidiocarp, which is the body that produces the basidium. So we're going to look at sexuality in fungi and how this actually works. Start out with the Zygomycota. This part is asexual, and in the asexual part, we talked about having the rhizoid and the sporangium and the sporangiophore. And it's asexual because this will go around and it will cycle very quickly. And this shows the rhizoid and the sporangium as well. When we talk about the sexual part of the Zygomycota, we talked about the suspensors that are formed on the outside, and these are actually hyphae that come in contact with each other to find out if they're compatible. If they are compatible, they start out by producing a sporangium on the inside, and that sporangium will increase in size. Remember that the suspensors are N, and that's going to give us an N plus N part on the inside of the sporangium. And over here we can see sporangia of different levels of maturity. And finally, we get this very large zygosporangium, and the center part is the zygospore. The outer part are the suspensors, and inside of the zygospore we get the formation of a diploid part, and then this is going to go through mitosis and meiosis, and out of it it's going to produce a new sporangium that looks just like the one that started this whole process in here. And that cycle is going to recur. When we look at the Ascomycota, we start out with this diagram. And in this diagram, on the left-hand side, it shows the hyphae up on top, which is dikaryotic. It's got one red nucleus and one green nucleus, positive and a minus. You can take them whichever way you want. And they start out, and you've got this hyphae which starts to replicate itself. So you duplicate the nuclei. You then see a little bend in it so that the two cells that are formed below the upper one are haploid. The upper one, which is going to become the ascus, increases in size. As it increases in size, you get fusion of the nuclei. Then you get meiosis and mitosis occurring, which is going to produce 8 haploid ascospores, and that's what you see on the right-hand side. Next to it, you have what we call a paraphysis, which is basically something to cushion the asci. This shows you part of a ascocarp, and in this particular instance, we're talking about an apothecia, and you can see the upper layer in here looks like it's got a lot of stuff in it, and if we blow that up, what we see is we see the asci. And in here, you can see the ascospores, and they're colored pink, and they're there are some, and you can count them, they will have 8 ascospores in it. Mitosis and meiosis, each one occurring once. If we look at the Basidiomycota, we start out with the haploid spores. They fuse to give you the dikaryotic mycelium. The dikaryon expands on forever, and it continues to grow and continues to grow. And eventually it will go and undergo sexual reproduction. And when it does that, it normally occurs in something like this, which you would call a mushroom. And the mushroom has the gills, and on the gills are where we get the formation of the sexual part. If you cut the gills open, you will see the gills like this. On the edges of the gills, we get the formation of the basidium. You start out with hyphae that is dikaryotic. It's got 1 green and 1 red nuclei. They're haploid. They migrate into the end of this, into the tip, which is going to become the basidium. They fuse. Right after they fuse, they undergo meiosis. And as they do that, we get the exchange of genetic material. Now you can see that the little green has a red around the outside and the little red has a green around the outside. These then become 4, and when you have the formation of the 4, then you get the formation of the little spores on top, and everything's going to migrate into the spores. Then these will be released off. This is a micrograph of one of these lamina cut. You can see the little protuberances coming out of this, and that will show you where the basidium is, and on top of it you see the basidiospores. And right about in the center of the photo, right there in the middle, you can see that. It becomes very evident. We see basidia with 2 spores on top of it. So it becomes very evident. Over here, we've got the same thing. Now what we see is the division. Where does it go from being the dikaryon to the diploid part, which is in the basidium, to the haploid part, which are the basidiospores? And then the basidiospores gets transmitted, and it starts the whole process all over again. Mitosporic fungi, mitosis. What we have here is things that reproduce based on mitosis, and since they're reproducing based on mitosis, we don't have a sexual phase. They are asexual. This is penicillium. See the spores are asexual. This is what penicillium looks like in culture, and all that fuzzy stuff are spores, so you get lots of them. This is a different fungus in culture, and you can see the fuzzy part, and that is the spores. This is asexual in nature. If you put it under the slide, it looks like this. Now on this, you can see the septate hyphae, and you can see 2 spores that are being produced, and it's kind of like they're a balloon being blown out of the hyphae. And these will be the propagules of it. These are formed through mitosis. This is Aspergillus. And when we deal with Aspergillus, we see a format like that. Up at the top, we have, it's not a sporangium because it's not enclosed, but it's external, and you're going to have these little tiny spores produced, and these spores are asexual. We can also have asexual where it's non-sporulated. If you look at this particular plate, you see these large masses of fungi on the inside. These are called sclerotia. They act as a propagule, but they don't have any spore formation with it. And you can see them right there. This is a bean. This was growing in the field. And you see the little brown parts, those are sclerotia. And the little white parts are sclerotia that are less evolved, and eventually they will become black. So when we talk about reproduction in fungi, we talk about sexual reproduction. We saw a couple of different ways that they occur, where you can have the fusion of non-motile gametes, you can have the fusion of 2 non-motile gametes, and then a lot of growth in a dikaryon, and then the production of the diploid phase. So fungi are rather unique in the way they reproduce when they reproduce sexually.